Hello everyone, it is me, Pui. I am back with another car academy, although to call this academy is a stretch. I guess academic in the way that it's going to be very self-indulgent and possibly quite useless for everyone else. But I just wanted to think, I had some musings this morning about the question, is Warrior an aggro deck? And I wanted to kind of process that in real time and see if it's any use. If anyone else has their own ideas, I would love to hear them. So on its surface, yes, Warrior is an aggro deck, is what one might say. Obviously, they're warriors. Warriors do battle. The whole point of them is the battle step. They gain most of their advantage through attacks, as Moxie's so gracefully put it in a Warrior primer, I think like 2 years ago now, maybe even 3, how time flies. And you know, their main point is attacking. And they attack to win the game. As long as they're still attacking, they're probably still winning. So that's the makings of an aggro deck. I've always found it incredibly disingenuous to call it an aggro deck, and I've even heard some people go ahead and call it a control deck, which feels, I mean, significantly more insane in a lot of ways, but the argument is there. Because you're trying to stick a threat, and then you've got nothing but answers for what they're doing to push that single threat through until it's over. I think both of these are reductive, and both of these are missing a crucial aspect of the deck, because calling Warrior an aggro deck ignores that giant bevy of traps and what they do. It ignores the fact that most of the time the Warrior player is not going to be playing more than one Warrior, nor do they need to win. The control deck aspect, much more obviously, is ignoring the fact that at any time you can be playing 2 monsters, 3 monsters, and you're attacking to win. That's the point. So I'd say it is neither an aggro deck or a control deck. For me, when I think about it, there's 2 kinds of decks that I think I'd be more likely to call Warrior. I'd be more likely to call Warrior a mid-range deck or a tempo deck. Now, for starters, a lot of this is very much skewed by the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has 1 summon per turn. Especially in GOAT, that's very often kept and held to, that it's 1 summon a turn. And you can attack past monsters that your opponent controls. And this is very much in contrast to Magic, which is the game where most of these archetypes were first thought of. A game in which you can play as many monsters as you can afford resources and mana for. And having more monsters of your opponent is a means to get damage through. It's 1 attacker for 1 blocker, and everything else is a direct attack. In contrast, if your opponent plays a bigger monster than you in Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's it. You're not attacking anymore until that's gotten rid of. And that's a very big part of the Warrior strategy, is having to get rid of those monsters, which is why a lot of those cards like Reinforcement of the Army and the Toolboxiness of it is so important. But even in the context of GOAT, with these mechanical changes, I'd still supply that Warrior is not an aggro deck as much as an aggro deck can be within those confines, because especially now, Earth aggro exists. And I think anyone would agree that Earth aggro is a lot more akin to an aggro strategy than Warrior. If you look at Earth aggro, the monsters are even bigger on average, care even less about utility and card advantage, and the deck is also more likely to play more monsters at the same time, because it's playing 3 copies of Gigantis, Gigantes, Gigantes, however the fuck you want to say it. Personally, it's going to be Gigantis for me. It can even play the Earth Spirit if it wants to. And its trap lineup does not play Solemn Judgment, and most Earth aggro experts, especially, you know, my captain, Shaggy Powers, would say, you do not play Solemn in your Earth aggro deck. There's a reason why the deck plays Saku, and there's also a big reason why the deck is playing 2 to 3 Dust Tornado at any time, because it's not about countering your opponent's moves. It's about continuing the aggression with no chance for response. And that's why Dust Tornado is so much better in the Earth aggro, where you really don't have to worry as much about your opponent's monsters being able to take yours directly, or having a thing that can stop you from beating you down with the massive monsters. So when you go back to Warrior, in contrast, Warrior does not have that aspect. It's not trying to play multiple monsters nearly as much. It doesn't always have the biggest monster on the field, especially with Earth aggro about. It is much more focused on the fact that it has these good answers. But the people who call it a control deck are still wrong. So going back to those 2 deck types, I would more appropriately call it, we have mid-range and tempo. Now let's start with mid-range. I'd say mid-range is a concept that you all are more likely to be familiar with. It is somewhere in between aggro and control. And the idea of it is that in a controlling matchup, it plays the aggressive deck, and in an aggressive matchup or in a combo matchup, it's going to play as the control deck. So, if you think about what Warrior's trying to do against Chaos Turbo, this makes a lot of sense. They are going to be trying to remove the threats as they come, and they're trying to get in attacks as fast as possible, because I'd say most people would agree that Chaos Turbo has the inevitability. So Warrior's goal is to try to break down those defenses as fast as possible, be getting in more attacks than they could possibly handle with their tools, because not every one of their tools is really applicable to Warrior. You know, if you keep trading with them, eventually they're going to draw a Nobleman of Crossout that's good for them, good for you, and horrible for them. And once that starts happening, they're going to start breaking down. So against Chaos Turbo, Warrior is absolutely an aggro deck. But if you look at it against, like, Reasoning Gate, not so much. If you look at it against even something like Panda, not so much. That attacking plan isn't going to work as well, because there's bigger monsters to deal with, there's more aggressive things, and you're going to lean a lot more on those traps and that stun aspect. Another thing that comes very much to mind for me is the idea of Thoughtseize and threats. So there's a very common deck type in Magic the Gathering called the Rock, otherwise known as Jund or Abzan, depending on its variation. And the idea of this is that it will play a turn 1 discard spell. That is a card that will let you look at the hand and discard a card. Significantly more fair in Magic, but certainly has that same utility. You're taking their best piece, and you're getting full knowledge of their hand. And you get to go and take out whatever is going to be worse for you, and then have that full knowledge going forward. Then following this Thoughtseize, you're going to be playing the most efficient threats that you possibly can, and the most efficient answers you possibly can. And if this doesn't already sound quite familiar to you, I don't know how that is, because that's exactly what Warrior does. I mean, they've got Dawn Zalug, which is like a monster version of this. Most of them have agreed Dust Shoot, amazing card. So most of the time, Warrior makes a great use of Dust Shoot, more than any other card. And the reason why is just because it's playing the most efficient threats and the most efficient answers, right? I don't think it gets more efficient than Exiled Force, all right? It's searchable. You summon it, unless they have exactly Solemn Judgment, it's going to do its thing, and it's recurable if you have the revivals, right? You think of something like Blade Knight. Blade Knight is a massive monster, and it has a chance to negate flips. That's amazing. DD Warrior Lady, amazing monster, chance to go 1-for-1 with the monster, right? Even if you look at Kaiku, Kaiku has a good body, has that stun effect. Dawn Zalug adds that discarding pressure. If you even think about the cards Warrior has been able to add these days, it's becoming less and less of an aggro deck. Think Reaper and think Faith. Having this face-down play aspect, which are still, these are some of the greatest mid-rangey cards out there, right? Flipping a Faith is going to put you hugely ahead. Reaper can just do about anything in a mid-rangey fair aspect. So these cards really are going to make it shine the way that Warrior can be considered a mid-range deck. And then on the other hand, we have the possibility of calling it a tempo deck. So a tempo deck also is a concept that comes more from Magic, and it very much hinges upon the fact that there exists a resource system and exists limited intervals in which you can use your resources, i.e. there's a tempo of the game. On the first turn, you can play something that costs 1 mana. On the second turn, presumably 2. On the third turn, presumably 3, etc., etc. So your cards will progress powerfully, but crucially, you do have a certain amount of resources each turn to play a card. In that vein, if you can stick a good threat on turn 1, and you can stop every single thing they do turn by turn for the rest of the game, that first threat's going to take the game. It's similar to Control, but it's different from Control because the goal isn't inevitability. The goal is control-like answers for speed. You're trying to kill them before they ever get past your little stun cards. Think something like Compulsory Evacuation Device. And this is a perfect example of a tempo card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because in Yu-Gi-Oh! And especially GOAT format, our bottleneck isn't a mana system, it's your 1 normal summon and your 1 set. So if you use a Compulsory Evacuation Device, it's going to answer any monster, face up or face down. It's going to give you an opportunity to attack, but it's not a permanent answer. It's going to do that for only 1 turn. So this is a very much of a tempo kind of card because it's putting them back a turn. And then hypothetically, if on turn 1 you stick a threat and you bounce their threat with the Compulsory Evacuation Device and attack, on turn 2 when they set it again, then you can go ahead and get Exiled Force. And then you're still making use of your tempo, you're still getting to attack. And this feels a lot more akin to what Warrior is doing. I mean, even the example of Exiled Force is a card that Warrior uses. If you think about what Solemn Judgment is, and you think about what it can do for an opponent's normal summon, for opponent's cards, and all that, it has that same sort of aspect. Sakuretsu Armor getting rid of their blockers, Nobleman of Crossout getting rid of their defenders. All of this is, again, to allow Warriors to make that one attack. And before, a while back, maybe before Earth Aggro, I'd say, I would have argued that all aggro decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, or certainly all aggro decks in GOAT format, have to be tempo decks, because aggro decks play in this way. They use these one-for-one stunning cards. They're simplifying the game, but more appropriately, they're just trying to continue attacking enough until you're dead, at whatever cost. That's when they're doing their best. Earth Aggro kind of turns that on its head, because Earth Aggro is a lot more about pushing the damage. And even the deck called Aggro Bomb, right, I don't think there's actually been a really good aggro bomb deck, possibly ever, but at least not recently, unless you want to consider the double tap thunderclap one. That is a lot more about pushing damage and damn the resources. But the fact that Warrior as a deck cares about resources, I think, is a very strong indication that it's not really an aggro deck, and it's a lot more like a tempo deck, especially in comparison to Earth Aggro and even double tap decks and the like, which are a lot more about just pushing the damage through at whatever cost. And then lastly, and this is something I will put in here now, if I'm moving over to other formats like Edison, and I'm trying to think about things like Hero Beat and Blackwing, you can actually see this same kind of situation. I'd say that if we wanted to compare them, Blackwing plays a lot more like Aggro Bomb and a lot more like Earth Aggro, whereas Hero Beat plays a lot more like Warrior. And I think anyone, especially in this situation, would be better able... And I think anyone in this situation would be much better able to be able to tell the difference between those two decks. Blackwing certainly still has a trap lineup and still has an answer, but Blackwing is a lot more focused on its swarming, and also has Kalut, which Kalut's whole job is to just deal extra damage in the most infuriating way possible. But a deck like Warrior and a deck like Hero Beat, even if they have Honest, it doesn't matter here. A deck like Hero Beat would never be doing a play that would look like summon Shura and then discard 3 Kaluts. And it wouldn't be willingly blowing up its own monsters using Icarus attack, knowing that it could easily replace those monsters later and get more attacks in. Because Hero Beat is a lot more about using that one stable attacker and trying to stun the opponent with its cards. It is a lot more that kind of mid-rangey and tempo-y aspect, and a lot more about the single summon and its continued attacking on the board at all costs. Even looking at Honest versus Kalut, this is clear, because Honest is designed to very cleanly answer a card and deal a fixed amount of damage at doing so. It is more like a removal than Kalut is, even if Kalut can be. So in any case, I think I've rambled long enough about that. I hope that gave you some other thoughts about how one may typify decks, and I hope you can also internalize that for deck building and gain a more of an understanding of what kind of cards actually facilitate what kind of strategies. I would very much like to hear your thoughts and comments on this topic. If you want me to talk about this further, or if you want me to do this same kind of musing on other deck types or other archetypes of decks, please let me know. I'd be happy to do it. In fact, I am currently working on a video now. It's going to be a while since it's out. I've got a lot going on in my life, but I do have a video planned. It's going to be a deep dive on a very special deck type, piloted to success by a very special person. So keep your eyes tuned and your ears peeled and all that shit and whatnot and bajungus. Hit that subscribe button so you can be notified, and I hope you have a lovely day.